October 12th, 1492. I'm standing on a beach somewhere in what you call the Bahamas, and I'm convinced I've just pulled off the greatest navigation hack in human history to find a shortcut from Europe to China and India. Problem is, I'm looking around for spice markets and silk traders, and all I see are tropical birds and confused indigenous people who definitely aren't speaking Chinese. My name is Christopher Columbus, and this is the AP U.S. History My Story podcast. So here's the thing about being completely wrong but thinking you're absolutely right. It can literally change the course of world history. I'd been pitching this Asia route for years, getting rejected by Portugal, France, England, everyone who had money and boats. And then Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain finally said, "Bet, let's see what this guy can do." Probably because they were tired of Portugal getting all the good trade routes around Africa. The math seemed perfect in my head. All the scholars were saying the Earth was way smaller than it actually is, and if I sailed west, boom, I'd hit Japan and China, and we'd be swimming in gold and spices. What nobody told me is that there were two entire continents just chilling in the way, completely blocking my route to Asia. Let me tell you, those 5 weeks crossing the Atlantic were not giving main character energy. My crew was low-key ready to throw me overboard because we'd been sailing into what looked like endless ocean for longer than anyone had tried before. No land, no birds, no signs that we weren't about to sail straight off the edge of the world, and they thought we were going to do that. I had to lie about our progress in the ship's log because if they knew how far we'd actually sailed without saying anything, they definitely would have mutinied. And then October 12th, everything changed. Tierra, tierra, land, land. One of my sailors, Rodrigo de Triana, spotted this island at like 2 a.m. and got us all up. And suddenly I went from crazy Italian with a death wish to genius navigator who just opened up the entire world. When I stepped onto that beach, I was convinced I'd reached the Indies. Like no cap, I thought these islands were just off the coast of China. I started calling the people I met Indians because that's literally where I thought I was. And that name stuck for centuries, even after everyone figured out I was completely geographically confused. The local indigenous people, they'd been living here for thousands of years and knew exactly where they were, thank you very much, came out to meet us. They were curious, friendly, brought us gifts, showed us around their island. And what was I thinking about? Gold, spices, where's the mainland where all the real action is? I spent the next few months island hopping around the Caribbean, absolutely convinced that if I could just find the right route, I'd sail into a Chinese harbor and come back to Spain as the richest man in Europe. And then I never found it. I never found China, Japan, the spice markets, nothing. But what I did find was way more important than what I realized at the time. Let's talk about what my accidental discovery actually started, because it's wild how one navigation mistake launched the most massive cultural exchange in human history. Before 1492, the Americas and Europe might as well have been in different planets. Two completely separate worlds with different plants, animals, diseases, technologies, and ways of life. The Columbian Exchange. Yeah, they named it after me. Both flattering and terrifying when you think about the consequences. It basically flipped everything upside down for everyone involved. And not all in good ways, real talk. From the Americas to Europe, we're talking about crops that literally changed how people ate. Potatoes, tomatoes, corn, chocolate, tobacco. Like imagine Italian food without tomatoes or Irish history without potatoes. None of that exists without my voyages. These crops were so much more productive than European grains that they caused massive population booms across the continent. But from Europe to the Americas, well, that exchange was way more complicated and unfortunately pretty devastating for the indigenous populations. We brought horses, cattle, pigs, and other livestock that completely changed how they lived and traveled. We brought new farming techniques and crops like wheat and rice, but we also brought diseases that were absolutely catastrophic. Here's the hard truth that I didn't understand at the time. Indigenous Americans had been isolated from the diseases that Europeans and Africans had for thousands of years. Smallpox, measles, typhus, these diseases that Europeans had built immunity to for over generations hit Native American populations like biological warfare. We're talking about population decline of 90% in some areas. It was literally genocidal, even though most of it wasn't intentional. We certainly didn't know what we were doing. And then there's slavery. The plantation system that grew crops like sugar, tobacco, and cotton created a demand for enslaved labor that led to millions of Africans being forced to the Americas. You'll hear from some of those voices later in the podcast, and that whole system traces back to the economic opportunities that my voyages created. The crazy part is that I made 4 trips to the Americas and died in 1506, still thinking that I'd found a route to Asia. I literally never figured out that I'd stumbled onto entire continents that Europeans didn't know existed. It took other explorers and map makers to piece together what I'd actually discovered. I bump into John Cabot from episode 1.3 every now and then, and he still gives me crap about it 500 years later. But here's what changed everything. Once word got back to Europe that there were new lands across the ocean, it was like the world's first viral news story. Every European power wanted in the action. Spain started colonizing the Caribbean and Central America. Portugal set up in Brazil. Hernan Cortez in 1.5 took my basic discovery and took it to the extreme in conquering entire empires. The economic impact was insane. All that gold and silver flowing back to Europe from American mines completely changed the global economy. Spain became the richest country in the world for a while, which led to all kinds of political shifts and wars. The whole concept of mercantilism, where countries tried to accumulate as much gold and silver as possible, was basically built on American wealth. Standing on that beach in 1492, thinking I just found the back door to China, I had no idea I was starting a process that would completely reshape 2 continents and create the conditions for everything that came after. The good, the bad, and the absolutely horrific. Sometimes the most important moments in history happen when someone is completely wrong about what they're doing, but does it anyway. My navigation skills were trash, my geography was worse, but I accidentally connected 2 worlds that had been separate for thousands of years. Whether that was ultimately good or bad for humanity, that's way above my pay grade, but it definitely changed everything. Like, follow, and share the AP US History My Story podcast, because these stories hit different when you hear the original voices that shaped our country.